promote is revisable. It's subject to change based on evidence, argument, and so on. And oh, what a challenge it is. That's why this institution is so very important, other institutions of higher education, because, you see, paideia at its deepest level is about the formation of wise attention. It's about trying to get students to attend to the things that matter and shift away from the superficial things. How do you engage in what Plato called the turning of the soul, and pedagogy? That's what education is. When we arrive, most of us have very narrow assumptions. We have some parochial sensibilities and provincial ways of looking at the world. We grew up in bubbles. We grew up in neighborhoods that didn't have a lot of Socratic energy. We may have had a lot of love. That's a beautiful thing. Never denigrate grandmama or granddaddy because they didn't read Newton, Einstein, or Whitehead. Some of your grandparents may have. I'm just talking about mine. But at the same time, they carried with them some assumptions and presuppositions that needed to be called into question. You talk about legacies of male supremacy, legacies of white supremacy, legacies of homophobia, legacies of American centrism, where you think that somehow an American life has more value than a life in Yemen or Pakistan or Afghanistan or Ethiopia or Guatemala. How do you broaden out the worldview of precious students in such a way that they embark on an endless process of Socratic self-examination? That's what formation of attention is. In fact, one can say, tell me what someone is attending to and it tells you much about who they are. They attend to superficial pleasures. They attend to highly commodified ways of being in the world, just obsessed with buying and selling, and oftentimes willing to sell themselves rather than be integral selves. That's a deep spiritual crisis as well as moral decay. Paideia, tied to the profound desire for justice, but always connected to that larger sense of turning from the superficial to the substantial. It's about the cultivation of a critical self and the maturation of a loving soul. Now, I come from a people and a tradition connected to Nelson Mandela, yes, but rooted here in the United States. A people who for 400 years have been terrorized and traumatized and stigmatized in various ways. Deeply hated and yet taught the world so much about love. And I've always understood my calling, trying to keep that legacy alive. Frederick Douglass's and Harriet Tubman's, Ida B. Wells, Martin King's, Donna Hathaway's, Aretha Franklin's. Think of John Coltrane's Love Supreme. Think of Toni Morrison's Beloved. Think of the love-soaked essays of James Baldwin, where he says love forces us to take off the mask. We know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Every note shot through with a love sensibility. Save the baby. Who really cares, Marvin? Crying out from his soul. Has there ever been a figure? I met some magnificent students in theater earlier in the dialogue today. Has there ever been a figure on the American stage that exemplified and enacted more love than Mama and a raisin in the sun, written by a genius from Chicago named Lorraine Hansberry, still in her 20s, would be dead by 34, but that character resonates down through the quarters. Stevie Wonder, love and the need of love. I can go on and on and on. What is it about these people willing to look terrorism in the face and say, we refuse to terrorize others, we want freedom for everybody? That's what Frederick Douglass said. Ida B. Wells, what do you say in the face of Jim Crow, Jane Crow, another form of American terrorism, of which every 2.5 days for almost 50 years there was some black body, some black woman, some black child, some black man, woman, baby hanging from some tree, the strange fruit that southern trees bear, that the great Billie Holiday sang about with such power, and the Jewish brother writing the lyrics, Brother Mariposa. And if he was here, he would be breaking his fast. Yom Kippur right now. What is it about these folk that muster the courage of Socratic self-examination, but connected to a willingness to be sensitive to the suffering of others, empathetic, putting themselves in the skin of others so that as they're terrorized, they don't choose to create black versions of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but rather produce Martin Luther King Jr.'s love warriors to the core. And that particular tradition is the leaven in the American loaf. Because to go from Ida B. Wells to Martin King, from Frederick Douglass to Fannie Lou Hamer, if black people had chosen something else, there'd have been civil strife every generation. There'd been a civil war every generation in the United States. I like to tell my white brothers and sisters, when you see black people, sometimes you ought to just say, thank you. Thank you for Martin King. Thank you for the nameless mothers and grandmothers who refused to terrorize when they were terrorized, refused to traumatize when they were traumatized, refused to hate when they hated. What did Emmett Till's mother say when she stepped to the lectern west side of Chicago in Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ in August of 1955? Her baby right there in front of her only child. She said, keep that casket open. I want the world to see. I want America to see the underside of American democracy. She stepped to the lectern and said, what? I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. What goes into that kind of shaping and molding of a soul? What goes into the shaping and molding of a people and a community that can continually dish out that kind of love of truth, a love of beauty? Just listen to the voice of a David Ruffin. Regardless of his life, that Negro can sing. Listen to the falsetto of Ted Mills of Blue Magic, of Russell Tompkins of the Stylistics, by Eddie Kendrick with David Ruffin. Mama in L.A. renamed her child after Eddie Kendrick. He's a genius. His name is Kendrick Lamar. The tradition goes on. It's not just justice and truth, it's beauty. It's not just beauty. There's a tenderness there. Nelson Mandela, Martin King, Malcolm X. They were tender persons, personally and interpersonally. James Baldwin wrote an essay on Malcolm, said, I never met a sweeter man. Now, it's true that most of white America didn't get that memo. Oh, no, not with Malcolm. Oh, but you had to know him. You had to know him. He grew, he developed, but there's a tenderness, there's a sweetness, there's a gentleness that goes hand in hand with the tradition that I'm talking about. And the challenge for the younger generation is, How do you undergo the kind of paideia in present circumstances so that you accent the best of the legacies of Nelson Mandela, the best of the legacies of Martin King? We could add Mahatma Gandhi, a whole host of Miles Horton, the towering vanilla brother, white brother of Highlander Center in Tennessee, where Rosa Parks was 3 months before she decided to sit down on a bus in order to stand up for justice. Burned down by his cousins, member of the Ku Klux Klan. Rebuild it up over and over again. That's courage. That's self-examination. That's determination. That's fortitude. That's commitment. That's conviction. That's a challenge for the younger generation. 4 questions I want to put forward. And this is especially for the students here at this grand institution. Because we want to keep the focus where it belongs. That's what we do. We are teachers. Teaching is a sacred profession. Actually, it's a vocation. It's a calling, not just a career. And the greatest of all democratic public intellectuals in the American empire, W.B. Du Bois. Got a lot of competition. Towering figures like John Dewey, Edmund Wilson, Susan Sontag, Lionel Trilling, James Baldwin, but I go with W.B. Du Bois. I want you to imagine him. February 1951, he's in handcuffs. The government's trying to send him to jail. He's already taken away his passport. He's 1131 Court Street. Heights, greatest borough in the world, Brooklyn. I'm from Sacramento, California, but that's just an external observation. I love Brooklyn. He had obtained the house because one of the great literary artists of our time, and then, his name was Arthur Miller, the author of Death of a Salesman, All My Sons. Bought the house and then handed the keys over to W. Du Bois, given the redlining of banks. It was a common policy to reinforce Jim Crow Jr. Segregation, not by law, but in practice, de facto. He had one visitor who was also under house arrest. He lived at 4951 Walnut Street in Philadelphia. His name was Paul Robeson. Was the most popular Negro in the world in 1939, but was under house arrest in 1950 because of his association, struggle for justice, profound desire for justice. Just those two together in dialogue with each other. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can see my cold is coming out, but I just don't want it to get in the way. I want to communicate today. Absolutely. But what happens in that dialogue? Du Bois says he wants to write a love letter to the younger generation, hoping they will undergo some moral and spiritual awakening based on Socratic self-examination, but also based on the rich prophetic legacy of Jerusalem. Going back to Hebrew scriptures, spreading hesed to orphan, widow, fatherless, motherless, downtrodden, those who are dehumanized. To do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with thy God, echoes of Micah. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream of Amos. Mediated through Jesus. Also at work in Muhammad. Du Bois says, Paul, how do I do that? Thank you so much. I'll hold off on the hug from him. I've hugged him already today. I don't want to give your family a cold. I don't want your family to have a cold. Du Bois does what? Imagine this. 85 years old. He embarks on the writing of 3 novels, a trilogy. In the first novel, The Ordeal of Mansour, page 275. These are the 4 questions I'm sending to the younger generation. I've been wrestling with them all of my life. And I'm trying to exemplify the highest level of paideia. This is Du Bois, of course, first black man, PhD from Harvard, Fisk University undergrad, studied for 3 years, University of Berlin with Max Weber and other towering historical sociologists, returns to the United States, one of the founders of NAACP. He's also an Alpha brother, 06. Like Donny Hathaway and others. And the 4 queries are first. How shall integrity face oppression? How shall integrity face oppression? How, as young students, can you engage in an endless quest for integrity in an age of cupidity and venality? In an age of love of money? In an age of love of narrow success? In an age in which everything is for sale and everybody is for sale, and people are so willing to sell themselves for a mess of pottage in order to be successful. In an age which people are less concerned with the 10 commandments and obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Just look at the business pages, that's what you see. Scandal after scandal after scandal, even in the presidential campaign. Scandal after, did you get caught? Oh my God, did you say that? Oh my God. All of us know we're all finite, we're all fallible. But to embark on a quest for integrity and find yourself radically cutting against the grain, because the grain is toward cupidity and venality. Intellectual integrity, trying to tell the truth, and the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. How difficult it is. Journalism, newspapers, to really tell the truth. Look at drones, for example, in America. 45 drones under Brother George Bush. 450-something under Brother President Obama. No serious talk about drones until an American was killed. Then all of a sudden there was a press conference that afternoon. Then there was a recognition. We've got to provide economic compensation. I said, well, wait a minute, how many innocent non-Americans have been killed? Over 200 children have been killed. Why the obsession with just when Americans get killed? Well, that's how we operate. Well, you know what? That doesn't have moral integrity. They said, well, Brother West, does that make you anti-American? No, it makes me anti-injustice in America, anti-injustice in relation to any nation, any country. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., both of them Christians. One of the things that fascinated with Nelson Mandela is, I see he was shaped by Methodism. He went to a Methodist college and so forth. And of course, he had worked with communists, but he always held on to his Bible. He's got a picture of his Bible and him in the sail. And of course, the claim is what? That the flag is always subordinate to the cross. It's not the cross subordinate to the flag. And if the cross is about unconditional love, unarmed truth, then every voice of justice, every voice of suffering needs to be taken seriously. So that a life lost in Somalia ought to have the same status as a life lost in the United States. And that's never, ever going to be massively popular. But look at line 24a of Plato's Apology, when Socrates says what? The cause of my unpopularity is what he calls in the Greek parrhesia, P-A-R-R-H-E-S-I-A. Parrhesia means plain speech, frank speech, fearless speech, unintimidated speech, speech that will get you in trouble. But if there's integrity in your speech, you're not about trying to be popular. You're about trying to be true to something bigger than you. So you can be a force for good, and therefore you cut radically against the grain. That's what I mean by the Santa Clausification of any force for good. People are trying to somehow fit you in. The worst thing young people can ever be told is somehow the end and aim of life is simply to be successful. If success merely means material possessions and being well adjusted to injustice. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel is right when he says indifference to evil is more evil than evil itself. It's the callousness of the heart. It's the coarsening of the conscience. It's the chilling of the soul to turn away from the suffering, especially of the least of these, echoes of the 25th chapter of Matthew. And of course, Jesus himself uses a language that flows out of Hebrew scripture. Love thy neighbor as thyself in the 19th chapter of Leviticus. But it's a legacy of Jerusalem that is so easily lost these days. So there's no accident. We were talking about this in the wonderful dialogue with the students. Child poverty in America. 45% of black children under the age of 6 live in utter poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world. That's a disgrace. 22% of all children, each child, no matter what color, equally priceless and precious. What kind of future can any democracy have when that kind of poverty is in place? And do you hear any serious talk about it in the election? I won't say presidential campaign because they're not the only two running. You got a whole host of folk running for other offices. Did you hear any serious talk about in the last 8 years? Another black president, you would have thought. Black president got Martin Luther King Jr. right there in his office. Martin looking at him every day. My dear brother Barack Obama, I appreciate you being so brilliant and charismatic. How you won is amazing. It shows that American people are much less racist than they were when I was around. I applaud them, but I don't give moral prizes for people who are less racist than their grandparents. But I was talking about poverty, racism, militarism, and materialism as the 4 forces that would suck the blood out of American democracy. But lo and behold, that child poverty is still operating, tied to decrepit school systems, massive unemployment and underemployment still at work, families weak, communities feeble, too often police, as Marvin Gaye says, trigger happy. Need for police accountability. Martin was talking about it in the 60s. Marvin was singing about it in the 70s. 2016, Ferguson, Charlotte. We're not too far from Ferguson, are we? Just a few hours away. We just had a debate in St. Louis. Did you hear any talk about Ferguson? Nope. Not a mumbling word. Not a mumbling word. What a challenge. Where is the paideia, the self-examination, the criticism, the willingness to bear witness, to raise voices, not in a self-righteous way? And this is very important for folk who are on fire for justice. Sometimes people become so self-righteous at being on fire that people don't feel as if they can engage in dialogue with you because you're too dogmatic. No. We have to be fallible in our exchange with one another. We have to be receptive enough to learn and listen. But Du Bois says, how does integrity face oppression? This is a major problem among spokespersons and leaders. I've been blessed to teach in prisons now for 37 years. I started when I was in college, Norfolk Prison, right outside of Boston. Just finished my class at Broadway. When I started, there were 300,000 prisoners. Today it's 2.5 million. That's the expansion, incarceration. War on drugs is a war on poor people. Criminality at work on Wall Street, 2008, insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activity, predatory lending. How many Wall Street executives